A vicious killer roams the country, taking his victims wherever he finds them. He strikes in cities hundreds of miles apart, then vanishes. Police are forced to rely on few clues as they reconstruct his trail of murder and embark on a dangerous pursuit. In this program, some of the names have been changed. Palm Beach, Florida, is a vacationer's paradise. Its upscale resorts and beautiful beaches attract tourists looking for adventure and romance. In the fall of 1974, while visiting Palm Beach, Sarah Mitchell met a man named Daryl Gordon, a self-proclaimed restaurateur. On November 14, Mitchell's new friend offered to give her a ride to an appointment the next morning. While they were on their way, Daryl pulled the car to the side of the road. He said he was having car trouble and got out to check under the hood. When Sarah asked him about the trouble, he pointed a pistol at her. He forced her out of the car and started dragging her towards the woods. "I am the law. What are you doing? Let go of me." Sarah Mitchell struggled free and ran towards a couple who had moments earlier pulled to the side of the road. "Daryl's pulling a gun at me." Daryl drove off. Sarah Mitchell was taken to the Palm Beach police station, where she gave a detailed description of the men who tried to abduct her and the Chevy he was driving. "We had car trouble. I don't know what happened, and we stopped. The police put out an APB on the car. An officer on routine patrol received word to be on the lookout for a red Chevy Impala. The driver was wanted for attempting to abduct a woman at gunpoint only hours earlier. When the officer spotted the car, he turned on his lights. The Impala pulled to the side of the road. As the officer got out of the car, the driver surprised him," West Palm Beach Detective James Gabbard reported. The officer got out to confront him, and he came out of the car with a sawed-off shotgun and pointed it at the officer, basically had the drop on the policeman. In the brief instant while the officer took cover below the dashboard, the suspect sped off before the officer could get his vehicle going again. He lost sight of him. The Palm Beach officer radioed he was in pursuit and requested backup. Cars were immediately dispatched to the area. Police swarmed over the neighborhood, searching for the red Chevy, and the driver had a head start. Eventually, the suspect found an empty carport and hid the car underneath. Police didn't know their suspect was now on foot. He was searching for a place to hide out. He found it at the home of Darlene Matthews. Matthews, who suffers from cerebral palsy, shared her modest home in West Palm Beach with her sister. Because of the nature of the crime, Darlene Matthews has asked that her identity remain hidden. "I was in the backyard hanging up the clothes, and I was bringing the clothes in, and somebody came up behind me." The stranger told her his name was Bob Williams and that he was with the IRS. Darlene didn't believe him, but it was too late. "There was nothing I could do. I told you he tried to follow me in, and I tried to pull the door closed before he could get in. He put his foot in the door and pushed the door, and he said, 'Don't you dare try to touch it.' Then he kind of pushed me aside, and he just came in with me. He pointed his gun at her and told her not to panic. He said he had just committed a robbery and needed a place to hide out until the police search for him cooled down." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He said to her, "If you scream or anything, I'll just blow you away." Matthews was terrified. He said, "Who's here with you? Who stays with you?" I said, "My sister works at a radio station, she's a copywriter." He said, "What time is she coming home?" I said, "Probably between 5 o'clock and 5:30 after she picks her up from nursery school." He then bound and tied Matthews. He assured her again if she cooperated, she would not be hurt. I didn't think he'd leave before my sister showed up because he needed a way to get out to go from our house to the next crime he's going to do. He had to have that car. After tying Matthews up, contrary to his word, he terrorized and assaulted her. As 5 o'clock approached, he went out to wait for Matthews' sister to return. Meanwhile, the West Palm Beach police located the red Chevy Impala. They found no sign of the driver. Technicians immediately began processing the vehicle. The first thing they noticed was the car's New Mexico plates. The car was not in the computer at the time, and they had to call out to New Mexico and find out the status of the car and where the owner was before they could determine that it was actually a stolen plate. Inside, police found a pistol that appeared to be the same gun Sarah Mitchell described her attacker using when he tried to abduct her by the side of the road. Police were convinced it was the same car used in the attack. While police processed the Impala several blocks away, Darlene Matthews' sister arrived home. Deborah Taylor had no way of knowing what awaited her inside the house. When she entered with her son, the intruder put a gun in her face and pointed her toward the room where her sister was bound. Deborah Taylor has also asked that her identity remain hidden. Everything just happened so fast. There was a man beside me, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't turn around or I'll kill you." I wasn't crying at that time, I was calm. It was like it was so unreal to me. He said, "I'll let you go in a second, okay?" I said, "Well, I'll let you go. This is about money." I told him, "I just cashed my paycheck. I have money in my drawer in my bedroom, and I'll give you the money and the keys to my car, just don't hurt us." He then forced Deborah Taylor outside at gunpoint. He was going to make his getaway, but he wasn't going to do it alone. "We're going to Georgia together," he said. I said, "Well, you don't need me." He said, "Yes, I do." A half hour after Deborah Taylor's Volkswagen pulled away, Taylor's son was able to free himself. He went to the neighbor's house, and she called the police. Investigators arrived within minutes. Matthews described her ordeal and gave police a description of her attacker. The description matched the driver of the Chevy Impala. Matthews was extremely concerned for the safety of her sister and begged police to find her. "We knew that this individual was desperate, obviously trying to get away. Taking someone with you is very serious, it's not just leaving and trying to get away. He's actually taken a potential hostage and kidnapped someone and also tied up 2 other individuals, the juvenile son and the sister, and left there." They immediately began to take steps to try to locate that vehicle. The West Palm Beach police mobilized. They hit the streets and disseminated the description of their suspect in Deborah Taylor's car. We sent out teletypes and information to all the surrounding law enforcement agencies. We contacted the FBI because it was obviously a kidnapping case, which gave the FBI authority and they could certainly assist us with lots of manpower. Now that this case involved kidnapping, the FBI immediately dispatched agents from the Palm Beach office. When investigators learned their suspect had a captive, they knew they might need a hostage negotiator. Agent James Kavanaugh joined the investigation. "I was called because I was the hostage negotiator, and I also do the abnormal profiling for abnormal behavior for the FBI in that area. So I responded to the police department to work with their detectives." Meanwhile, police continued processing the Impala. They hoped it held some clue to where their suspect might be taking his hostage. Police ran the VIN number on the car to try and confirm the identity of the driver. West Palm Beach forensic technician Greg Parkinson supervised the search of the car. Using the vehicle identification number on the frame, we searched it through the National Crime Information Center. The car was registered to a man named Richard Evans from Lima, Ohio. The West Palm Beach police contacted Detective Jim Ketchum in Lima, Ohio, to run a check on the owner of the car. Ketchum told the investigators in Florida that Richard Evans and his car had been missing for several weeks. In an effort to find him, the detective had been tracking his credit card receipts. We started tracing that activity through the credit card companies in the different areas it was being used, different states. We tracked approximately 37 different states where his card had been used. Ketchum went on to tell the Florida investigator that the signatures on the credit card receipts didn't match Evans' handwriting. The detective in Lima, Ohio, gave the West Palm Beach police a description of the missing Richard Evans. It did not match their suspect. The investigators traced the name Darrell Gordon. The real Darrell Gordon was alive and well but had discovered his credit card was missing a few weeks earlier and reported it stolen. Police surmised their suspect had stolen the card and assumed Gordon's identity. None of this information brought the authorities any closer to finding their suspect. The technicians continued to focus their attention on the car. Investigators found some record albums, jewels, newspaper articles, and several items of clothing, including some with labels from a men's store in Monroeville, Georgia. On the back seat, Greg Parkinson made a significant discovery. The vehicle literally became an evidence treasure trove. We discovered a document that was the last will and testament that had been dated 1 or 2 days prior to the incident. The name of Paul John Knowles was on that document. The investigators believed they had finally found the real name of their suspect. They ran a background check. We had the name Paul John Knowles run through the FBI system and the Florida state system, which gave us his identification record for all his arrests and gave us photographs. Detectives took the photographs to Darlene Matthews to confirm the identification. "You're certain that's him?" West Palm Beach Detective James Griffin asked. "No doubt," she replied, and she immediately picked out Mr. Knowles as the individual that had been in her home and had tied her up and attempted to rape her. As the individual that kidnapped her sister, while police were beginning to learn all they could about Paul John Knowles, he and his hostage Deborah Taylor drove into the night. Taylor was terrified as the Volkswagen headed away from West Palm Beach. Knowles was continually scanning the radio, trying to keep up with the news coverage. "I found out about the crimes when it went on the screen, when they flashed my face and his face, and that he was wanted by the FBI, and I went, wait a minute, and that's when I knew in my heart that he had killed somebody." Knowles began to tell Taylor about his murderous past. There were several times that he said that he killed more than 1 or 2 or I don't even know. I think he even said one time he killed 12. I just blocked it out of my mind. As he talked, she began to see the face of the killer. When he started talking about murdering somebody, you could just see the evil. It was a different person. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In a flash, he would trigger off into another personality. I knew I had to keep my wits about me, and like I said, I kept praying from the minute I left the house until each time something else happened throughout the night. Knowles assaulted Taylor repeatedly, shifting between states of calm and uncontrollable anger. Taylor knew she was in a desperate fight for her life, the only defense she had was her wits. While the search for Knowles continued, the FBI uncovered more information about his past crimes. Investigators learned of another Florida case that was apparently linked to their suspect. On August 1, 1974, at 8:15 p.m., Jacksonville investigators responded to a frantic call. Kathy Johnson reported her 2 young daughters, Laura and Melissa, missing. Earlier, she had left the girls alone when she was suddenly called away to tend to a sick relative. She told the police that she only intended to be away for less than an hour. She expected her husband, a commercial fisherman, to return home soon. "Don't go in my room," Detective Tommy Reeves said. As it happened, the husband did not get off on time. For some reason, they were having engine problems on the boat and could not get home on time. Mrs. Johnson called to check in on the girls and spoke to them around 6:30 p.m. Her husband was expected any minute. He returned home at 7 o'clock to find the 2 little girls were not there, they had disappeared. There was no sign of forced entry in the house and no sign of a struggle. Police hoped the girls had only wandered off. They began to comb the area around their home. As the search broadened, no trace of either of the girls was found. It seemed they had simply vanished. A search was organized that covered the general area around there. The woods were searched, police helicopters were utilized, and motorized units were sent into the woods and any areas where they might be, and they were not able to find the little girls. Police asked neighbors whether they had seen anything unusual. One of them told the officers they had noticed a yellow car outside the house the day the girls disappeared. It appeared that Knowles was a kidnapper and a murderer. His victims included men, women, and children. The search to find him intensified. Knowles and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, continued to outrun the police dragnet, trying desperately to keep Knowles calm. As the Volkswagen headed north, Knowles became tired and wanted to stop for the night. He noticed a motel on a little hill and said, "We're going to stay here for the night." He said, "I'm just too tired, and then we'll head on in the morning to Georgia." Deborah agreed and said, "Okay. We're married. I'll think of a name when we get to the front desk." He said, "We're newlyweds." Knowles checked them into the hotel under an assumed name. It seemed like the perfect place to hide out until the police search died down. Florida authorities had searched for hours, trying to capture an armed man who abducted a woman from West Palm Beach. Their suspect was driving a brown Volkswagen. As each hour went by, the FBI and the West Palm Beach police widened their dragnet, knowing that time was crucial. The FBI had compelling evidence that Paul John Knowles, the man they sought, had murdered a school teacher in Jacksonville Beach. They also suspected him in the abduction and possible murder of 2 missing girls in a neighboring town. Police in the Jacksonville area were still searching for the girls who disappeared from their home a few weeks earlier. The FBI was quickly gathering information on their suspect's past crimes, but he continued to elude them. The more they learned, the more concerned investigators became for the safety of his hostage, Deborah Taylor. As the FBI circulated information about Knowles throughout the Jacksonville, Florida area, leads began pouring in. Agents learned that on the day after the little girls disappeared from their Jacksonville home, a woman named Margaret Hayes had been killed in a quiet suburb of Jacksonville called Atlantic Beach. On the same day, the woman was found murdered in her home. One of her neighbors gave police an important piece of information. "Thank you for coming." According to the neighbor, on the day Margaret Hayes was murdered, a man knocked on her door looking for someone named Betty Johnson, but she refused to open it. Detective Tommy Reeves told reporters, "The officers at the scene checked the house. They found no room disturbed except the bedroom. The deceased, she was bound and gagged and had duct tape on her. The crime appeared to be a burglary, but the level of violence was excessive. Whoever committed this crime had come not only to steal but also to kill." Investigators processed the remainder of the house. They dusted the window and cut screen for prints and found nothing. What they did know was that the killer had brutalized the victim but then had stolen some money, as well as a television and a rifle from the Hayes home. The police in Georgia relayed to the Florida investigators that the day after the Millville murders, a woman had seen a man using Clayton Cooper's credit card. When she heard of the Cooper murders, she called the police and described the men she had seen using the victim's credit card. The description matched Paul John Knowles. Officers from Millville traveled to Florida, where they met with West Palm Beach evidence technician Greg Parkinson. We displayed the evidence to them that we had. They viewed everything, but they keyed in on the Millville-related items, particularly the newspaper article, and the clothing. The evidence confirmed the Georgia detective's suspicion that Paul John Knowles was their suspect. Now they joined the search to find him. Investigators now knew Knowles was a killer. Dead bodies and 1 death. The FBI and police in West Palm Beach were tracking a man who assaulted 2 women and abducted another. It had been several hours since Deborah Taylor was forced from her West Palm Beach home at gunpoint. As police tried to locate her, they widened their search perimeter. Investigators knew very little about their suspect, only that his name was Paul John Knowles and he was driving a brown Volkswagen Bug. The most important piece of information they had was the knowledge that they had to find him soon. FBI agent James Kavanaugh stated, "We put out a nationwide alert for that car with that license plate. We also, at that time, did grid searches in the entire city of West Palm Beach to find that vehicle and the surrounding cities." Hours before Paul John Knowles abducted Deborah Taylor, he had abandoned a stolen Chevy Impala in West Palm Beach. Forensic investigators pored over the car, looking for anything that might be a clue or help them understand this suspect. Agent Kavanaugh began to develop a psychological profile of Paul John Knowles. "I obtained a rap sheet for Knowles, which showed a variety of offenses that covered the gambit of everything from simple assault to murder and kidnapping, car theft, which is what we used in the profiling for him." Agent Kavanaugh's profile presented a frightening image. "We assumed, based on the number of items we were finding in the car, the variety of names, and the interstate travel to a number of states that this was not going to be a typical kidnapping or abduction, and that's the reason I was called to start with, because it looked like we were going to deal with a serial killer. The only hard evidence the police in West Palm Beach, Florida had to work with was a stolen Chevy Impala. The Impala was traced to a missing man in Lima, Ohio. Since the police discovered the car, Florida investigators had been working closely with Lima detective Jim Ketchum in the course of investigating the missing persons case involving Richard Evans. Detective Ketchum discovered an abandoned yellow Dodge Demon outside a hotel in Lima. When he ran the VIN number on the car, he learned it was registered to a Florida woman who had been murdered in her Jacksonville Beach home. When he contacted the police in Jacksonville Beach, he advised them that he believed they had recovered what they believed was their stolen vehicle. The yellow Dodge Demon had been stolen from the home of a woman named Emily Carter. She had been found murdered in her bedroom. The evidence found at the scene of the crime suggested that on the night of July 26, 1974, an intruder cut the screen on one of her first-floor windows. Emily Carter was a school teacher. Police surmised the intruder must have awakened her after he killed her, took her money, then took her car. The next morning, the Jacksonville Beach police learned of the murder when the woman's son discovered his mother's body. He offered police no solid leads. Her son had no idea why anyone would want to harm his mother. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians processed the home. Jacksonville Beach Police Detective John English reported, "The officers at the scene checked the house. They found no room disturbed except the bedroom. The deceased had been bound and gagged. The crime appeared to be a burglary, but the level of violence was excessive. Whoever committed this crime had come not only to steal but to kill." Investigators processed the remainder of the house. They dusted the window and cut screen for prints and found nothing. All they knew was that the killer had brutalized the victim, then took some money from her house. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined Emily Carter died of asphyxiation from the gag forced in her mouth. The police in Lima, Ohio, and West Palm Beach, Florida now had evidence linking Paul John Knowles to murder. With the evidence that Paul John Knowles was a murderer, police intensified the manhunt. As the Volkswagen headed north, Knowles and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, continued to elude the police dragnet. Taylor, frightened by Knowles's mood swings, made a decision to calmly keep talking with her captor. "I started talking about the weather, and I mean anything that would come into my mind to get his mind off of that newscast, and it worked. I had to do that from West Palm Beach to Fort Pierce, and that was over 70 miles. After hours of driving, Knowles became tired and wanted to stop for the night. We arrived in Fort Pierce, and he noticed a motel kind of like on a little hill, and he said, 'We're going to stay here for the night.' He said, 'I'm just too tired, and then we'll head on in the morning to Georgia.' I said, 'Okay.' He said, 'We're married.' Knowles checked them into the hotel under an assumed name. It seemed like the perfect place to hide out until the police search died down. Florida authorities had searched for hours, trying to capture an armed man who abducted a woman from West Palm Beach. Their suspect was driving a brown Volkswagen. As each hour went by, the FBI and the West Palm Beach Police Department widened their dragnet. Investigators knew enough about Knowles to feel that there was not going to be that much hope of finding Deborah Taylor alive, given the probability of his profile. The ongoing search escalated, as Deborah Taylor's fear continued mounting. I kept wondering when it would all end. Meanwhile, police were collecting more leads on Knowles's previous crimes. As forensic technicians continued to process the red Chevy Impala, the contents of the car and Knowles's arrest record confirmed FBI investigator James Kavanaugh's worst fears. It appeared that he was an interstate traveler. He had a car from one place, a license plate from another place, and credit card receipts from all over. As the search for Knowles intensified, investigators pushed to close the case before he claimed another victim. It appeared that he was an interstate traveler. He had a car from one place, a license plate from another place, credit card receipts and names from all over, so he had been on the road. We knew he had been traveling extensively, and then the agreement and the items we found in the trunk led credence to the belief that this was probably a serial killer that was just traveling the United States. As each hour passed, police became more concerned for Deborah Taylor. They feared if they didn't find her soon, they might not find her alive. While officers combed the Florida highway searching for Knowles, FBI agents studied his past. They learned he had been a career criminal with a series of burglary convictions. He'd been arrested after getting into a bar fight the same night Emily Carter was killed, but he escaped from the holding cell in Jacksonville. When he fled, he left behind his personal effects confiscated by the Jacksonville police at the time of his arrest. Among those effects, police found an address book filled with names and addresses of his friends and family. The agents located and began questioning the people listed in the book. None of Knowles' acquaintances had seen him in the past few weeks. Agents also learned Knowles' family lived in Jacksonville. None of his family members had seen him either. In studying his credit card receipts found in the Impala, the FBI learned which types of hotels Knowles usually frequented. Agents fanned out to hotels in and around the Jacksonville area to see if anyone had seen either Knowles or his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They came up empty. This guy's all over the board, doing all different types of crimes, but the trail that he left behind him had a very distinct trademark, so we would know where he was. The trick was to try to predict where he was going to try to head him off. Agents staked out Knowles' family members' homes in Jacksonville in the event he tried to make contact with them or hide out there. If Knowles had taken his hostage to the Jacksonville area, the FBI was determined to find him. Police all over the state of Florida had been chasing Paul John Knowles for nearly 24 hours. He had taken a West Palm Beach woman from her home at gunpoint. Investigators were desperately trying to track his movements. FBI agent James Cavanaugh pored over Knowles' credit card receipts, looking for some sort of pattern that might lead them to the killer. Cavanaugh knew they were running out of time. We had little hope that we were going to find Deborah Taylor alive because of the profiling we had done on Paul John Knowles. Those types of people do not respect life, they have no compunction about killing. The rules are for the suckers, they don't abide by them, and they do what they want when they want. As each hour went by, investigators widened their search perimeter. The police and FBI figured that Knowles was most likely headed north with his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They thought because he had friends and family in Jacksonville, he might be trying to hide out there. Police continued to watch the highways, and investigators disseminated information to the major media outlets throughout the state. In his hotel room in Fort Pierce, Florida, Knowles was keenly interested in any information he could find about the search for him and his hostage, Deborah Taylor. I found out about the crimes when it went on the screen when they flashed my face and his face and he was wanted by the FBI, and I went, wait a minute, and that's when I knew in my heart that he had killed somebody. Knowles began to tell Taylor about his murderous past. There were several times that he said that he killed more than one or two, or I don't even know. I think he even said one time he killed 12. I just blocked it out of my mind. As he talked, she began to see the face of the killer. When he started talking about murdering somebody, you could just see the evil. It was a different person. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that fast he would just trigger off into another personality that fast, and I knew I had to keep my wits about me. And, like I said, I kept praying from the minute I left the house to each time something else happened throughout the night. Knowles assaulted Taylor repeatedly, shifting between states of calm and uncontrollable anger. Taylor knew she was in a desperate fight for her life. The only defense she had was her wits. While the search for Knowles continued, the FBI and the West Palm Beach Police Department focused on their only real clue, the red Chevy Impala Knowles had abandoned before he abducted Deborah Taylor. Investigators inventoried each piece of evidence they found in the car and cross-referenced it with the National Crime Information Center computer. They got a hit. Some of the clothing found in the car matched items reported stolen during a double homicide in Milledgeville, Georgia. Investigators contacted the Milledgeville police. The detectives in Georgia told the FBI that they were working a double homicide that occurred a week earlier. They went on to explain that someone had seen their suspect. They had a composite sketch but had not located or identified the killer. The Milledgeville police told the Florida investigators that on November 6, 1974, Clayton Cooper and his daughter, Tammy, had been found murdered in their home. Milledgeville police arrived on the scene along with agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. GBI agent Gerald Coffey stated, "There was nothing to indicate who might be involved in the crime itself. The nature of the crime was not a typical type of crime for this community." In the master bedroom, agents found Clayton Cooper. He had been stabbed dozens of times while tied and helpless. The room had been ransacked, indicating that persons unknown had gone through the residence looking for anything of value or something that they might be able to use, such as firearms, money, coin collections, or jewelry. In the room next door, police found Clayton's daughter, Tammy. She was lying face down on the bed with her hands tied. She had been strangled. Her bedroom door appeared as if it had been kicked in. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie stated, "The only forced entry at the residence was to the bedroom door of the daughter. It had been kicked away. The facing of the door had been kicked in and pulled away from the wall. Apparently, she had tried to keep the suspect from entering the room, and he, in turn, kicked the door in and kicked the door facing loose and gained entry to the room." Tammy's room had also been ransacked. The family made a list of some of the items missing from the house. They included a diamond ring, a child's watch, and many articles of clothing, including a tuxedo. Inside the house, police found few clues. Neighbors hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. Investigators had no suspects. Police in Georgia relayed to the Florida investigators that the day after the Milledgeville murders, a woman had seen a man using Clayton Cooper's credit card buy something. When she heard of the Cooper murders, she called police. She described the men she had seen using the victim's credit card. The description matched Paul John Knowles. Officers from Milledgeville traveled to Florida. There, they met with West Palm Beach evidence technician Greg Parkinson. They had one of their agents and one of the detectives working that Milledgeville case come down to West Palm Beach immediately, and when they did, we displayed the evidence to them that we had. They viewed everything, but they keyed in on the Milledgeville-related items, particularly the newspaper article. The clothing and the evidence confirmed the Georgia detective's suspicion that Paul John Knowles was their suspect. Now they joined the search to find him. Investigators knew Knowles was a killer, and so did his hostage, Deborah Taylor. For hours, she suffered repeated assaults at the hands of her captor. Throughout the night, Knowles' mood shifted between relative calm and uncontrollable rage. "I didn't want to see that other side of him. I just knew I couldn't get him into that other personality, or I wouldn't be here to talk about it." Deborah Taylor was in a desperate fight for her life. She was doing all she could to stay alive in the hope the police would find her before Knowles' mood turned deadly. On the next episode of FBI Files, the search for Paul John Knowles continues. The perimeter widens, and the agents' efforts intensify. Investigators fear Deborah Taylor is running out of time. As the FBI and the police close in on the killer, they uncover more of his murderous trail. Agents know they must find Paul John Knowles before he kills again.